You hear me? Hello?
Okay. Yeah. Hi. Can
Hi.
you hear
Can you
me?
hear me? Yeah.
Yeah, I can.
Okay,
And
it's great.
actually, that sounds really good.
Mine too.
Yeah. Oh, good. Awesome. Okay. Cool. Um, so I wanted to make sure I was going to do sort of a brief version of your bio that I'll record separately, and I want to make sure that what I have in there is accurate and how you would want it represented. Um, so I say that you're a multimedia producer with journalism roots, um, and you had cut your teeth in journalism covering the Columbine shooting as a college student, and built a successful journalism career. Is that accurate before
Yep.
moving into producing?
Yep.
For ABC, NBC, and the Oprah Winfrey Show. You produced Gleason, which premiered at Sundance and was a New York Times Critics' Pick, shortlisted for 2017 Oscars. Also a prolific podcaster, all the wiser, um, and bestselling author of A Letter to My Dog. Um, and um, you're, you are or you were with Long Story Media?
I was a partner with Long Story Short
Were,
Media for
okay.
about 2 years. Yep.
Okay, okay. So also former partner, is that okay?
Yep. It is short form
Okay.
content company.
Okay, cool. And also for a number of years, executive director of it, so at the Oprah Winfrey Network.
Network, correct?
Oh, okay. All right. And it was executive director of talent, and how do you want me to represent that?
It's executive director of talent. Is
Okay.
fine. Yeah, it was talent and development, but I really ran talent. So
Okay. All right. Is there anything else in kind of that shortish bio that you would like me to include?
no, that's good.
That's
That's it.
good. Okay. All
Yeah.
right. Awesome. So then I'll go ahead and we'll start after a brief pause. And if you have time afterwards, I'm sure I'll have a couple questions for you just out of
Sure.
personal
Sure.
interest. And I'll just go over kind of that synopsis I sent to you, just kind of covering the topics, the audience being, girls and women that maybe want to end up where, you and our other guests are in fields that are less, where women are less well represented, um,
Yep.
and want it to be inspirational, and have tangible advice for the women.
Yep.
So, okay, cool.
Great.
All right, brief silence, and then I'll start. Hi, Kimmy. Thank you so much for being a guest on my show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be having this conversation.
Thanks. As I mentioned in my introduction earlier, you have worn a lot of hats. You've clearly done so many different things, but what I would like to do is ask you to tell us a little bit about how you grew up, what your childhood was like, how that played a role in bringing you to where you are now.
Yeah, so I grew up on both coasts. I was born outside Washington D.C. and then we moved to Southern California, which was a big change as a
Yeah.
preteen. And to be honest, I was not particularly good at the things that you're supposed to be do well. And sorry. Um, to be honest, I wasn't particularly great at the things you're supposed to be quote unquote great as growing up. I was not a great student, which in hindsight was a learning disability that was never diagnosed. And my sister was a great athlete. I was not a great athlete, but somehow I was always starting a club or captain of the team, even though I wasn't,
Mhm.
the best player. And I think that I balanced out my weaknesses and finding my strengths. And I think my strengths were my creativity and I guess maybe an early belief in myself, in spite of normal teenage insecurity, that I was a leader. So somewhere in me, nature nurture, I wasn't doing all that great academically, but I was finding other ways to succeed and express myself.
That's wonderful. And you are currently continuing to produce, and you have your podcast, All the Wiser. You
Mhm.
still kind of have your hands in a number of different things. Um, and the reason I wanted to talk to you is because we don't see a lot of women in this area of film and content creation. Tell me a little bit about what it's like being a woman in your field.
I think it's changed and evolved, and I think I've worked in all under the umbrella, if you will, of nonfiction storytelling, telling
Hmm.
stories about real people, and my hope with the intention that they're inspiring stories. But I've done it in a number of different ways. I would say traditional broadcast news, and this was not in the landscape we are today with, lots of talking heads and a million different networks. This was, you know, 15 years ago, Today's Show, NBC Nightly News was
Hmm.
much, it was male dominated. All
Right.
the executive producers at that point. And then there was a little machismo, I was there on 9/11 in the wake of a lot of war coverage and these male war correspondents and them coming back. And so I think as a young producer in journalism, I felt it, and even more so in hindsight, um, that the men held more power in the room to some extent. Even when you had really powerful women, you had Andrea Mitchell in the room, but somehow, when XYZ walked in, I felt that as a young woman, that the attention was focused on that person. Um, I, Interestingly enough, the Oprah Winfrey Show, Harpo, at the time that I was
Hmm.
there, I
Hmm.
don't know the ratio of female to male employees, but it was, without question, the majority were female. So a vastly different dynamic, and
Yeah.
then totally different, yeah. And then as a partner in a short form content company, we were a female led company. And then the film business is a whole nother thing. The amount of um, it's a male dominated for sure, especially when you're dealing with agents and directors, and ideally that's shifting. So I feel like I've done it all.
Right. Yeah. And for a young woman who maybe wants to follow the path that you have taken, what kind of advice would you offer them, and how would you describe some of the obstacles that you ran into as you developed your career, and how did you deal with those, and how did you manage those obstacles?
Yeah. um I think relationships matter most, no matter what your career choice is.
Hmm.
And how you treat people, whether you're the intern or the CEO, makes a huge difference.
Right.
And I think it was the first piece of advice my dad gave me was show up, work hard, and remember that relationships matter most.
Hmm.
um, so I think your um, ability to um, connect with people authentically, to show up, to work hard, um, to I think to be able to find confidence and power in your own voice, even when you feel like you're completely faking it. And I did for many years. I mean, I would fly to
Hmm.
New York and feel like I was a 12-year-old, wobbling in size 9 high heels. Like, how am I even a part of this meeting?
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember feeling that in such a real way, like the imposter syndrome for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Um, so, yeah, I think it's showing up. I think it's working hard, being prepared, having a voice is critical, and knowing that people matter above everything, and to be really thoughtful about that in your relationships. And I also think, as you move forward in your career, um, those relationships, even if they were a colleague from 10, 15, are of service to you and of service to the other person. People I worked with at 27 and saw my work ethic are way more likely now, and they're up there wherever their trajectory is, to say, oh yeah, I'll support, getting that person on your podcast. Um, so yeah, and as far as obstacles, um, I was on the booking team for Good Morning America at ABC, and we
Mhm.
negotiated interviews. And I think it was a little bit of casting. I think it was predominantly younger women in their 20s, in
Mhm.
part because you needed to go away at a moment's notice and maybe not return for 3 or 4 weeks because some big
Uh-huh.
story happened.
Mhm.
Um, and so, uh, again, now I'm a mom of three. Or is that likely going to be a good scenario? No. But I also think it was a little bit of like casting these young women to go out and quickly. There was something about it. And I think during that time, a male dominated network, being within that department, I did feel defined and not the greatest, most self-fulfilling way about my gender within the workplace and what it meant
Mhm.
to be a young woman
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
at that time.
Right. You mentioned your dad having given you good advice. Would you characterize your dad as one of your mentors and influences growing up? And uh, if he was or if he wasn't, aside from him, were there other really great inspirations and influential people throughout your career that you can count on?
Yeah, my dad, long term, is one of my greatest role models in business and in life, for sure. Growing up, it was a different era, so he wasn't a hands-on dad,
Hmm.
um, helping me make the posters for XYZ or on the side of the soccer field. And he was an entrepreneur who worked all the time. So I wouldn't say he shaped my that early evolution. But
Hmm.
to be honest, when I needed him most, probably, which is when he kind of backed away from his workaholism as he was getting older and wiser, was early on in my career. So I think without question, he's had a huge impact in helping to guide me.
And what about mentors within the workplace? Did you find that you had more women that acted as mentors, or did you also have men?
I had at Good Morning America, and the job I just spoke of, my
Mhm.
boss, um, I would say it's somebody having an innate belief in you that you are yet to have for yourself.
Mhm.
Um, I remember going over and she offered me the job and I said, but like, are you sure? And, am I qualified? I was a research, like trying to talk her out of my value, which is crazy. And she was just
Right.
like, no. And she's like, I can just, you have what it takes. I want to give you the job. And then, at the time Diane Sawyer was the anchor, and she was incredible. And I was able to, be lucky enough to, um, you know, observe, first of all, her, again, her work ethic, her curiosity about the world. Um, yeah, I mean, just an incredible, and somebody who I think, at least in my experience, really acknowledged hard work and effort. So those would be very early on impressionable, female, examples. And I have had male mentors along the way. And for the first time when I did a film, I had a quote unquote male business partner. We did
Mhm.
kind of raising all the, starting the production company and capital. And it was a group of, um, 5 men and, myself, kind of two of us being the primary, myself and Scott Fujita, who's actually an ex football player. And I don't know how tall he is. I think he may be 6'9", 6'10", and I'm barely 5'2". And we would have to go into business meetings together as equals, as
Yeah.
this, like, 6'9", as you can imagine, the, masculine NFL. And here I would come in next to him. So,
Yeah.
But I would say he was a great example in such equality. I think his respect for me, and that it was a true partnership, and that energy was brought into the room so very quickly, in spite of, the big strong male in the suit and the, petite female, that it was balanced out. And part of that, I think, was the tone that he set, and the space that we created for each other.
And, and that makes me think of the he for she movement, which, within medicine and within surgery, we talk about that a lot. Um, when when you have women in a more male dominated field, I feel like it's good and it's common for the women to band together because there is a sense of camaraderie, there's this common experience. But I think that sometimes you get a little bit of two camps.
Yeah.
And you get the one camp of women who say, you know what, F those guys, it's all us. And then you get the other camp where it's recognized that it's very important to have men as allies. And I think I fall in that camp because, I one of the things with us in medicine is, and this is similar in business and in other fields, in terms of like the locker room at the country club, or what happens
Yeah.
on the golf course and conversations like that. But for us, like in the hospital locker room, if you don't have somebody who treats women fairly and will speak up when something is not right, then who's gonna correct that behavior in the men's locker room when the talk is happening
Yeah.
there? You can have as many women as you want banding together and saying, we want to fight for what's right and what's equal and what's fair, but we're not in that locker room. And so I think it's really important to have those allies, like you're saying, as Scott Fujita was, in treating you as an equal partner and being an equal partner in your business.
Yeah, and I'm definitely in agreement with you, and that no change, with two opposing parties, I think happens. Hearts and minds do not change without connection, conversation, collaboration. And I don't
Absolutely.
think, so I think as we, men and women, evolving, can learn to develop sort of these equal, respectful relations, and have open dialogue, and also have room to hear frustrations on their end. But I
Mm-hmm.
think coming to anything from a place of contentiousness is not is not the road ahead. Is not where you're going to see meaningful change in the world.
Right.
So I'm a big believer in that, and I still feel, as a woman, and a woman who's had, it, grateful to have had some fair amount of success in her career. I think
Mm-hmm.
I still do get often that little inner voice. I don't think it would ever measure up with how I present myself, externally. That's probably true of all people. You have your, inner self and your outer self.
Right.
Um, so I wouldn't say that I'm always in a conversation or at a table with, majority men, coming from it of a place of complete ease in my confidence and my ability. I think sometimes you kind of have to reset and remind yourself of all those things, and uh, that the contributions, the potential for contribution, and the potential for the value in the room is completely equalized. And then
Mm-hmm.
tapping in to figure out what your value and your service and your contribution is, and just coming at it in a really authentic and confident way.
Right. And you're speaking to that imposter syndrome and how we're all susceptible to that in that little voice. And I think when you look at women that are highly successful and you speak about that it happens to you, I think that in and of itself is one way to help others who
Yeah.
suffer from imposter syndrome, because it's just so widespread, and I think it's so common, and it can hold you back if you don't have that other inner voice to say, hey, shut up.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Like, you don't know what you're
Cracking
talking about.
down.
I got
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Would you say that, of all the different things that you've done over the years, that there's any one project that you're just extremely proud of, that you hold very near and dear to your heart?
I think Gleason, which is the documentary film that I made with it started with really a group of friends, but my best friend's husband was an
Mhm.
NFL football player, Steve Gleason,
Mhm.
diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's, given 2 to 5 years to live in his early 30s. And then basically a week later, she found out she was having a baby. They were pregnant for the
Right.
first time. So he started filming himself and lessons for his unborn child. And he was very unconventional when you would kind of envision an NFL football player. He was like small and like drove this biodiesel truck and played the acoustic guitar and was really into photography. So his expression is he lost his expression and his physicality, and running and biking and all those sports became photography, time-lapse photography and video. So long story short, two young filmmakers when he could no longer, two young film students when he could no longer film himself, moved in to document their family. And where when I became involved was Steve decided he wanted to make a movie, so we
Mhm.
started a production company based off of their son's name, Rivers. So we started Dear Rivers Production, and it was years and years of flying around the country, of raising money, of coming up with. No longer were the resources you have working for Oprah Winfrey or a major network. There's no legal
Right.
department. There's no
Yeah.
CFO to say where we get. There's no, oh, well, you guarantee distribution for 5 million people. You don't even know if anyone will ever see it. So I think the
Yeah.
fact that a team of people created a film about people they love in a really responsible journalistic, having those boundaries, but also really caring very much about the a, a true narrative, and staying true to the story, um, and our intention and making it. So yeah, we sold to Amazon Studios at Sundance and Open Road Films, and we had a theatrical, and we're still on Amazon today, and we were shortlisted for the Academy Awards. So it's hard not to care so much about that work, because it's the most personal work I've ever done in my life.
Yeah. Clearly. Yeah. Clearly, you hold it very close to your heart. And I'll tell you that my husband and I watched that
Oh, you
a week or
did?
two ago. And, and so like, I didn't have any tissue in my room. We had toilet paper. And, as we speak right now, we're actually in the middle of the COVID pandemic. And so we've got this toilet paper, we're watching it. And it was just, I'm using toilet paper like it's going out of style. And I was like, Jared, we need to conserve toilet paper. But it was, a lot of tears, but at the same time, we were just marveling at the end, just how much contribution Steve and Michelle had made,
Yeah.
even in light of the diagnosis, and even when things got hard. And it was just very real and very raw. So, we thank you for making this happen, along with all the other amazing people you work with. But yeah.
Well, I mean, I wish I could have made you a funny film to laugh when your
No.
husband's there on the front lines instead of in COVID. But yeah,
No,
no,
it was.
if we're speaking about gender, there was a funny story early on. These two young film students created essentially a sizzle, which is a short representation of the footage and the potential for the story in a feature length film. And so that that was our biggest marketing asset, and we created a
Mhm.
deck and all of the opportunity and whatnot. And we
Mhm.
started tapping into our network to try and get it in front of the right people. And a lot of those people are the most powerful agencies and agents in LA and entertainment industry.
Right.
So we quickly developed this reputation, because the sizzle, nobody could watch it without crying. Like literally, like 60-year-old men who've never cried in their life would confess. And so we
Yeah.
kept developing this reputation. We go in for a meeting and they go, oh, you guys are the one, do you know who cried? It was always some male agent who had been notorious for being ruthless and no heart. They're like, yeah, we heard he cried. His assistant was in there when he watched it.
That's great. That's great. I mean,
Yeah.
it just speaks to just how much it touches people. So
Yeah, it's a powerful story.
yeah, it really is. So you also started podcasting, and
Yes.
you have a number of wonderful interviews under your belt in the All the Wiser podcast. And and as I was listening to some of these and kind of looking through and reading about some of the folks that you've talked to, I think what I got from it was that the common thread is that these are all folks who all obviously have really interesting and amazing stories to tell, but that it seems like everyone either has to face their own mortality or the mortality of somebody that they're very close to. Like they all experienced these life-changing events. And in the process of going through and interviewing all of these people, how do you think hearing these stories for yourself changed the way that you look at the world and the way that you look at your life and your own mortality?
Well, I think it's an interesting time that we're having this conversation during the COVID pandemic, and that
Sure.
we started a year ago to this week, and we talked about we used the word unthinkable in our
Mhm.
description of the stories we were sharing. We talked about
Mhm.
uncertainty. We talked about mortality and what we can learn about ourselves when um, facing loss, and
Right.
and and so much of that applies to where we are in this moment.
Mhm.
um, I think there's consistent themes, and that which we all know and we've heard a million times, and it's a matter of making them applicable to your day-to-day life to the best of your ability when you can remind yourself. But
Right.
really everything, kind of in the end comes back to the things that matter most, and they're pretty simple. They're the people in your life who you care about, and being, present and available to those people.
Mhm.
Finding humor and darkness and lightness is a consistent theme.
Yeah.
Finding gratitude even when that's really effing hard. And so, yeah, I think, and also not, I think it's important with our storytelling and our guests to not project that everything comes out with a red shiny bow and this new beautiful
Yeah.
perspective, and you're so
Yeah.
grateful for everything in life,
Right.
because it really isn't that, and people are still
Yeah.
struggling because they're
Yeah.
human beings.
Mhm.
But I think the message is that suffering is a shared experience, and we all have gifts to share. And sometimes when people have really had these heightened experiences, it almost feels like their wisdom and takeaway and perspective is heightened in a sense. And I
Right.
also think that they can find purpose and meaning in sharing it. Because it's
Mhm.
like if you go through something completely horrible, and why is this happening? Why is this happening? And 2 or 3 years later, you can then have a conversation, and somebody reaches out and says, I'm in the middle of this thing, and you gave me comfort, or you gave me hope. So I hope that there's a little bit of, you know, um, a cathartic experience, I would hope, for some of our guests.
Right. Absolutely. I think in personally speaking, I just started talking about my experience and how I ended up going into medicine and into orthopedics, and kind of similarly to me, I'm just like, well, I'm just kind of doing what I'm doing, and I've had people reach out saying, I just didn't think I could be a woman and also be a mom and go into orthopedics, and whenever you get that feedback from people, complete strangers, it really makes you say, you know what, it's good to speak about your experiences, and this
Yeah,
is this is kind of more just my path into surgery and into this career, but I think when people have these life-changing experiences, sometimes they're really horrible, like you say. I think sharing it and hearing that you've touched somebody really changes it a little bit for you. Doesn't make it
yeah.
doesn't change. It doesn't change. It doesn't reverse it. It still is what it is, but it changes the way that you experience it. And I think that can add a little positivity for sure.
Yeah, and that's our hope, is that ultimately these stories are inspiring, and that they do offer hope, and that they provide, takeaway and opportunities to, think differently about the world, or think differently about our own lives, or so yeah, I'm so happy that you're doing this for yourself and anybody else out there. It's has, for me personally, been such a meaningful, and I would say joy-filled process, to be able to meet now 30 new people, or some people I knew, but most of them, and to be able to have honest, real conversations, like no small BS, cocktail party talk, but talk about real stuff, with 30 new
Right.
people, and then share it with the hope, that people listen, and even if they just, get a little moment of, joy, or learning something new. So if you have something that within you, like a voice that you want to share, or a piece of yourself you want to share, or a passion you want to explore, or curiosity, there's no reason in the world, because there's no barrier to take that risk.
That's wonderful advice, and I actually tried to wrap up by asking if you have any tangible advice for women who want to hopefully do what you do. And that sounds like a really good piece of advice, but would you add anything else as far as career advice, life advice in this setting?
um I think I have, over the years, realize that you really have to zoom out and look at the entirety of your life, because I think, as much as, and it's interesting, I've been to a lot of panels recently in the past year or two, where it's successful entrepreneurs, and they're talking to younger women in their 20s, and they're like, first there, last to leave, and I kind of want to say, that works until it doesn't work, until, you're, in my case, sleep deprived, manic, not eating, and then you burn out, and
Hmm.
say, I have to, and you crash, and you have to come into. So I think I've talked about hard work and work ethic, because it's a core belief, and I think foundation, but also looking at your whole life. What does a successful life look like to you? What makes you
Right.
tick? What do you think is your gift, is your natural gift? And how can you apply that professionally? And then also making sure you take care of yourself as a human being who needs to be taken care of, so you have longevity. And I also think it improves your creativity and productivity.
Right. And I think that last part is has never been more important than now with where we are with the world, and just remembering that even as we're taking care of others and trying to help, that we still take care of ourselves, and that's really poignant.
Yeah.
So, well, I'm so excited that I had the chance to talk to you, and I want to make sure that if our listeners want to find you online or your podcast or any other information and keep up with what you're doing, that they have a way to find you. Can you tell us where they can go?
Yes. So the best place to go is allthewiserpodcast.com. We're also at All the Wiser Podcasts on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Or you can follow me personally at Kimi Culp. It's KIMICULP. But yeah, I'd love to connect with you.
Thank you. Thanks for being on.
Oh, it was a pleasure, and I'm so glad we got to meet during this dark time. These conversations bring some lightness and brightness to these days. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you so
All
much.
right.
That was
Um,
wonderful. Thank you.
yeah. So are you up and running? Have you?
So, you're my third interview.
Okay.
I'm just starting. I'm actually just starting, and I am hoping maybe sometime in late May to launch. It just kind of depends, I guess, after getting listed and on the directories and getting onto iTunes, which I'm I'm sure you could tell me a whole lot about, because I'm still learning about that.
Yeah.
But when I decided I'm not going to let this go, I'm going to just push forward with all of this. I like got more than what I had originally intended as my first season
Yeah.
of episodes scheduled on. I probably have enough for 2, all going to be done in April, which is awesome. So it's kind of a just good timing in a way, where now I have all this time, because I'm only in clinic twice a week and just handling emergency surgeries only. So but yeah, I actually just settled on a name. I was kind of playing around with a couple different show names, and so I'm going to call it the 6% with Nancy MD, and
I
6%
love that.
being, oh, thank you, being, there are a couple different numbers thrown around, but 6% women is what has been reported with orthopedics. And so even though
Yeah.
not everybody is at 6%, it kind of, I was thinking it kind of creates a little bit of mystery, like what is this
Yeah.
6%?
Yeah.
And
It's a
talking to
great
women
title.
where, it's kind of similarly single digit numbers a lot of times.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I'm just trying to wham bam put it all together. It's definitely something new to me, and as you're speaking about imposter syndrome and like, all of that, half the time as I'm scheduling these interviews, and I'll admit to you, as I was like reading about you and getting ready to talk to you, I was like, holy shit, is it too late to bail out? No,
What?
okay, I got to keep going.
And then meanwhile, I couldn't even get my earbuds to work.
No, it's true, but and I think it's one of those things where you find yourself in kind of a new situation, a new adventure. Like, I've never done this before. I've never like really even interviewed anybody other than for like my front desk position, and
Yeah.
so it's, you kind of get this like, well, who the hell am I to be doing blah 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 blah, and so
I mean,
um
I think that things from an interview, you're really naturally good at, like, I think you're really like so naturally a host. You carry yourself really well and sort of take control of the conversation in a way that a host need to, but you're also a great
thank
listener.
you.
So the balance of those two things is critical. And I always say it's a combination of curiosity and listening, right? So what are
Hmm.
you innately curious about? And sometimes there's the questions that maybe feel a little bit uncomfortable to ask, or equally as important, if not more, if you were listening to the interview, so the listening audience, what is the one thing you are dying to ask? And so I always think about, curiosity and then listening, because what can happen, and it depends, which I can tell you, again, you're a natural at it. A lot of people in their head will kind of cast, if you will, the conversation, and then
Hmm.
they're sticking to that script. Meanwhile, the interviewee has offered a nugget to take you down this completely unexpected road.
Hmm.
And a follow up question as simple as why. And then the thing that, you drops your jaw and you're like, I had no, you know what I mean? And then the conversation is at a whole new level. So I think the listening and the curiosity, and then I think not, was very afraid early on of showing too much of myself, I guess, because we do some post production, and I'm like, no, I'm, kind of this role of the journalist, and not showing pieces of myself who I am as a person, or moments of levity, or and I actually found that people do want to know you. People want to know about you. People want to connect to you. So showing up as you are in the world,
Hmm.
that's what that's what these kids connect to with YouTubers in their bedrooms, and it's what people in our demographic connect to with podcasters. They feel like they can get
Right.
to know them and have
Yeah.
a connection with them. So I think
Oh,
those are kind of the main takeaways, and then figuring out the audio and the technical, and
yeah.
promoting. And but if you ever need to someone to talk to or troubleshoot with, or I'm happy to be here for you. And I'll probably be calling you a year from now saying, how did you get your podcast to 10 million people?
Oh my gosh. This is
Yeah.
completely just my passion project, and like your words are just so kind. Thank you for that. I'm just winging it.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, but it was so nice to talk, and I very well may take you up on the offer where I'll email you and just be like, "What do you do with this?"
Yeah, no, 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 do it.
So, yeah.
I'd love to help however I can. So please know that I'm here as a resource, and I really appreciate you having me on.
Thank you so much. If you ever think of anyone who might be good as a guest or who'd be willing, feel free to shoot me an email too.
I already I already have several ideas I was going to email you. So
Oh, awesome. I love it.
yeah, yeah, I'll